An isolated fortress, 960 people trapped, and a tragic fate that still echoes today. Imagine being surrounded by a relentless army. No way out, no reinforcements, no hope. You look out over the horizon and see nothing but the enemy closing in, building a massive ramp to seal your fate. What would you do? Fight to the bitter end? Surrender to an empire that had already destroyed your city and your sacred temple? Or would you make the most extreme decision of all? This isn't a scene from a movie. This actually happened. In the year 73 AD, nearly 1,000 men, women and children faced an unthinkable dilemma atop the impregnable fortress of Masada. Isolated in the Judean desert, with no chance of victory, they made a choice that still haunts humanity today. Why did they choose death over slavery? What can this story teach us about faith, courage, and sacrifice? The story of Masada isn't just a war chronicle. It's a timeless lesson about resistance and purpose. Just as the heroes of the Bible faced seemingly impossible trials, these Jewish rebels stood against one of the greatest empires in history. But did they make the right decision? Would surrender have been the wiser path? Get ready, because what you're about to hear might change your perspective on faith, sacrifice, and destiny. What happened at Masada wasn't just a battle. It was a choice that left a mark on eternity. If you believe this story needs to be told, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Many people watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet, and your support helps us bring more transformative content. And tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? Let's see how far this story reaches across the world. The story of Masada is not one that can be told in isolation. To truly understand why nearly 1,000 men, women and children found themselves trapped atop a fortress in the middle of the desert, we must go back to a time of growing unrest, religious fervor, and an empire that sought total dominance over its subjects. The Great Jewish Revolt, which erupted in 66 AD, was not just a rebellion. It was a desperate struggle for survival, a battle for faith, and ultimately the beginning of a tragic end. But how did it all start? Why did the Jewish people rise against Rome, a military superpower of the ancient world? And most importantly, how did this conflict lead to the fateful siege of Masada? For decades, the Roman Empire ruled over Judea with an iron grip. They controlled trade, imposed heavy taxes, and stationed their legions across the land to ensure compliance. But Judea was unlike the other provinces of Rome. It was not merely a territory to be subdued, it was a land with a deep and unshakable religious identity. The Jewish people believed they were chosen by God, set apart from the nations, and that their covenant with the Almighty was above any earthly rule. This belief clashed violently with Rome's demand for absolute loyalty. The tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right spark to ignite the flames of rebellion. That spark came in 66 AD, when a Roman governor, Gessius Florus, plundered the temple in Jerusalem and massacred Jewish worshippers. This act of sacrilege was too much to bear. The people rose in fury, driving out the Roman garrison and declaring their independence from Rome. It was a bold move, one that many believed was divinely inspired. The rebels took up arms, organized their forces, and against all odds managed to hold Jerusalem. For a moment it seemed as though victory was possible, but Rome does not tolerate defiance. In response, Emperor Nero sent his most feared general, Vespasian, along with his son Titus, to crush the rebellion. The war that followed was brutal. Cities were razed, entire communities were slaughtered, and the roads were lined with crucified rebels as a warning to others. Yet the Jewish resistance fought on with an almost supernatural determination. They believed they were fulfilling the prophecies of old, that they were fighting a holy war, much like the battles of Joshua and David. But prophecy and faith alone could not stop the might of the Roman war. Machine, In 70 AD, after a long and grueling siege, Jerusalem fell. The Second Temple, the very heart of Jewish faith, was burned to the ground. Smoke rose into the sky as the sacred city was reduced to ashes. The fall of Jerusalem was not just a military defeat, it was a spiritual devastation. The Jewish people were scattered, enslaved and humiliated, but some refused to submit. Among them were the Sicarii, an extremist faction of Jewish rebels known for their zeal and ferocity. Named after the small, curved daggers, Sicae, they carried, these warriors believed that no price was too high for freedom. For them, surrender was never an option. As the Romans tightened their grip over Judea, the Sicarii knew they had only one choice: retreat to the most impregnable stronghold left, Masada. So they fled into the desert, to a fortress built decades earlier by Herod the Great, a man known for his paranoia and architectural genius. Masada was designed to be unbreakable, a fortress of solitude surrounded by sheer cliffs, with massive food stores, reservoirs, and defenses that could withstand a siege for years. To the Sicarii, it seemed like the perfect refuge, a last stand where they could continue their resistance. They believed that if they held out long enough, perhaps God would deliver them as he had delivered Israel in the past. But was Masada truly their salvation? Or was it merely a delaying of the inevitable? Far away from the burning ruins of Jerusalem, hidden in the vast and merciless Judean desert, stood Masada, a fortress like no other. Perched atop a towering plateau, its walls seemed to blend into the rock itself, a citadel carved by both man and nature. To anyone standing at the base of its cliffs, Masada was an illusion of security, an island in a sea of desolation, a final hope for those who refused to bow to the Roman yoke. But was it truly unbreakable, or was it merely a temporary sanctuary, postponing the inevitable? Masada was built decades earlier by Herod the Great, the same ruler who once sought to kill the infant Jesus, Matthew 2:16. A master of fortification, Herod feared revolts, betrayals, and foreign invasions, and so he erected this fortress to be his ultimate refuge. It was more than just a stronghold, it was a palace of survival. The fortress had vast storerooms stocked with grain, wine, and oil, massive cisterns collecting enough water to sustain hundreds of people, and warehouses filled with weapons. The walls, thick and towering, created a formidable barrier that made any attack nearly impossible. In the eyes of those who had fled here, Masada was a fortress that could withstand the test of time itself. For the Sicarii, the extremist faction that took refuge within its walls, Masada was not just a military stronghold, it was a symbol of divine resistance. They were the last free Jews in the land of Israel, the final warriors of a crushed nation. Unlike other Jewish rebels, the Sicarii refused to compromise. They believed that surrendering to Rome was worse than death, and so they turned Masada into their sanctuary of defiance. From this high ground, they raided nearby Roman outposts, ambushing supply routes and striking with deadly precision. To the Romans, they were terrorists. To themselves, they were freedom fighters fulfilling the will of God. Life in Masada, despite its strategic advantages, was not easy. The desert surrounding them was harsh, unforgiving, and isolating. The sun scorched the land by day, and the nights were bitterly cold. The Sicarii lived in constant tension, knowing that Rome would never forget about them. Men trained daily, sharpening their weapons and practicing for battle. Women and children played their role in maintaining the stronghold, preparing food, tending to the storerooms, and reinforcing their belief that they were part of something greater than themselves. Masada was not just a place, it was an idea, a mission, a last stand against an empire that sought to erase them from existence. But could a few hundred rebels, no matter how determined, truly outlast the greatest military force in the world? Could their faith alone keep the enemy at bay? The Sicarii believed that God had delivered them this fortress, that he had provided them the means to resist. But faith is often tested in the fire of adversity, and their greatest trial was fast approaching. Down below, beyond the cliffs and valleys, the 10th Roman Legion was marching. Their banners fluttered in the wind, their weapons gleamed under the desert sun, and their war machines were ready. Rome was coming, and Masada's time was running out. From the moment the Legio Ex Fretensis set foot in the Judean desert, the outcome of Masada was sealed. This was no ordinary Roman unit. This was a highly trained and battle-hardened legion, personally chosen to finish off the last remnants of Jewish resistance. The commander leading this operation, Lucius Flavius Silva, was not a man known for mercy. His orders were clear: Masada must fall. But how do you conquer a fortress that sits atop a 400-meter-high plateau, surrounded by sheer cliffs? How do you break an enemy that has nowhere to run? To any lesser army, this would have been an impossible challenge. But Rome did not accept impossibilities. They were an empire built on conquest, a force that had crushed nations and rewritten history with the edge of the sword. And they had time, manpower, and ruthless ingenuity on their side. The first step was containment. The Romans knew that a siege was the best way to wear down the defenders. So they built a circumvallation, a series of fortified camps, and a massive stone wall encircling Masada. No one could escape. No supplies could get in. The Sicarii were completely trapped. The only thing keeping them alive were the vast resources that Herod had stored decades earlier. But how long would they last? And more importantly, would the Sicarii break before their supplies ran out? At first, the rebels were confident. From the top of the fortress, they looked down at the Roman camps and saw nothing but patience. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. But the Romans were not just waiting. They were building. Silva knew that a traditional assault on Masada's walls would be suicidal. Instead, he devised one of the most ambitious siege strategies in history, the construction of a massive assault ramp. Using thousands of Jewish slaves, many of whom had likely survived the destruction of Jerusalem, the Romans piled earth, stone, and wood to slowly create an artificial mountain leading directly to Masada's walls. This was a task that would have seemed absurd if it weren't for the sheer determination and engineering brilliance of the Roman military. The Sicarii must have watched in horror as the ramp grew higher and higher. Every day their doom inched closer. They launched arrows, threw rocks, and did everything they could to slow the construction, but the Romans were relentless. They knew that once the ramp was completed, they would unleash their full fury upon the fortress. And so, after months of backbreaking labor, the impossible was achieved. The ramp reached the top. The Romans brought forth their battering ram, mounted their siege tower, and prepared for the final assault. Masada was about to face its reckoning. For the Sicarii, this was the moment of truth. The enemy was at the gates. Their resistance had lasted for years, but now there was no more time, no more delays. They were faced with the reality that every warrior dreads: what happens when the walls finally fall? The final night had come. Inside the walls of Masada, the Sicarii stood in silence, watching as the Roman battering ram smashed against the fortress gate. The enemy had finally reached them. There was no more time to fight, no more time to prepare. By dawn, the 10th Roman Legion would flood into Masada, bringing destruction upon everyone inside. But for the Sicarii, there was one final choice to make, a choice more terrifying than battle itself. Would they surrender and become Roman slaves, watching their wives and children taken as spoils of war? Or would they choose to die as free men, never allowing Rome to claim victory over their souls? The leader of the Sicarii, Eleazar ben Yair, gathered his people for what would be their last conversation on this earth. His voice, filled with both sorrow and conviction, echoed through the halls of the fortress. He reminded them that Rome had already destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and slaughtered their fellow Jews. There was no mercy left. There was no rescue coming. And so he spoke words that would change history forever. He told them, "Let us die before we become slaves. Let us choose freedom even in death." The weight of his words hung in the air. The people of Masada were not merely deciding for themselves. They were deciding the fate of their children, their families, their legacy. Could they truly take their own lives rather than surrender? Was this what God wanted? The Bible speaks of many battles where God delivered his people. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. David slew Goliath. Gideon defeated thousands with only 300 men. But there would be no divine intervention this time. No last-minute miracle, no army coming to their aid. The choice was in their hands. In the silence of that night, the Sicarii came to a chilling agreement. They would not allow themselves to be captured. They would die on their own terms. They drew lots, choosing 10 men among them to carry out the final act. One by one, fathers, husbands and warriors lay down their swords and embraced their families for the last time. The chosen 10 moved through the fortress, carrying out the tragic decision. When only one remained, he fell upon his own sword, completing the final sacrifice. At sunrise, the Roman soldiers stormed the fortress, expecting a fierce battle. What they found instead was silence. No warriors rushed to meet them. No archers rained arrows from the walls. As they walked through the stronghold, they were met with an unimaginable sight, hundreds of bodies, lifeless yet unbroken. The Sicarii had taken the one thing Rome could not steal, control over their own fate. But in the shadows of Masada, hidden within a water cistern, a few survivors remained. 2 women and 5 children had chosen to hide instead of die. It was through their testimony that the world would come to know what had happened in Masada that night. Rome had conquered the fortress, but they had not conquered its people. Masada had fallen, but its story was just beginning. Masada had burned, and Rome had taken its last stronghold, but the silence left behind was louder than any victory cry. The Chakil, Romans had expected captives, slaves to parade through the streets of their empire, broken warriors to execute as a warning to others. Instead, they found only lifeless bodies and the echo of a people who had chosen death over submission. The Sicarii had denied Rome the satisfaction of conquest, proving that while their fortress could fall, their spirits never would. But was it an act of courage or the ultimate tragedy? Had they secured their place in history as heroes, or had they thrown away their only chance at survival? For years, Masada's story remained buried in time, preserved only in the writings of Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian who had once fought against Rome before becoming its scribe. It was through his words that the world learned of Eleazar ben Yair's speech, the casting of lots, and the final chilling decision that shaped Masada's fate. But how much of this account was fact, and how much was legend? Josephus, writing under Roman patronage, had motivations beyond simple record-keeping. Some scholars argue that he exaggerated, framing the Sicarii as fanatics rather than freedom fighters. Others believe that while the details may have been dramatized, the core truth remains. Masada was the last stand of a people who refused to be enslaved. For nearly 2,000 years, Masada was little more than a forgotten ruin in the Judean desert, lost to history. But in the 20th century, a team of archaeologists led by Yigael Yadin uncovered something extraordinary. They found the remains of the Roman siege ramp, still intact, proving that the legions had spent months constructing their deadly path to the fortress. They unearthed storerooms filled with provisions, confirming that Herod had stocked Masada for a siege. They found weapons, coins, and inscriptions, all bearing the marks of Jewish resistance. But the most haunting discovery was a collection of broken pottery shards, each with a different name. Were these the very lots cast by the final 10 men of Masada, deciding who would take the lives of their comrades before falling on their own swords? Masada is no longer just a ruin. Today it stands as one of Israel's most sacred national symbols. Soldiers climb its steep paths, standing where the last defenders once stood, and take an oath: Masada shall never fall again. It is a place of pilgrimage, where history meets identity, where the echoes of the past still whisper in the desert winds. Some see it as a tragic mistake, a lesson in the dangers of extremism. Others see it as the ultimate testament to faith, proving that even in the face of annihilation, some will never surrender. One thing is certain: Masada was never just about war. It was about defiance, about belief, about the human spirit refusing to be broken. And as long as people climb its ruins, as long as the story is told, Masada will never truly fall. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me, do you think the Sicari's choice was courage or desperation? I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more content like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and let us know which country you're watching from.